In this episode of Wes Talks About Random Stuff, the random stuff I'm going to talk about is the JET program. Based on the demographics of people that watch these videos, I imagine many of you have thought about taking the JET program, so I'm going to talk about it and tell you my opinion about it and some maybe tips to get into it if that's what you want to do. But also I hope that this can help you figure out if it's the right thing for you. But let's just break this down into kind of three simple parts. One, what is the JET program? How do you apply and get into it? And three, is it for you? Is it a good thing to do with your time? If you're in a hurry though, I definitely do overall recommend it. I think it's a really good program. I had a great time on it. I spent 3 years in it, and I do not regret making that choice at all. But for more detail, let's start with number one. So the JET program is a Japanese government-sponsored program that will take you to Japan, where you will teach in Japanese schools. Now, there are a lot of programs in Japan that will do this. However, the JET program is in almost every single aspect, not all, but almost every single aspect, the best. Not only is it the most prestigious because it's through the government, it pays the best, it has the best support network, and it broadly has the most benefits. There are 3 different ways that you can get in. One is as an ALT, which is an assistant language teacher. The other is a CIR, which is somebody who will work in a Japanese city hall kind of. They'll usually do some teaching as well, but helping out with this and that. And then very rarely, I've never met anyone that did this, but it is a position that does exist. There are people that get in as like a sports coordinator assistant. This is a full-time job with contracts year to year. But although while teaching English is a huge part of that job, a more subtle but very important part of the job is that you kind of serve as a contact point for students, for people in your town, etc., to interact with non-Japanese people. Especially in smaller towns, you might be the only one there. Broadly speaking, this is kind of a starter job. It doesn't have to be your first job by any means, but the pay is not immensely high. However, it has gone up recently, and I will say that because you will usually get some kind of cheap, if not subsidized housing, and that Japan's living expenses all in all are not super high. As long as you live within your means to some extent, it is very easy to have a great time in Japan on the wage that you get. I actually had housing that was on the more expensive side compared to many of the people in the town I was living in because I was in a teacher's dorm. More about that later. But I still was able to go out basically every single weekend, at least once or twice, for dinner and drinks with friends. I was able to go snowboarding 2 to 3 times a month during the winter months, and I traveled the entirety of Japan multiple times, including 2 trips to Hokkaido, trips to Osaka, Kyoto, Nara, etc., trip down to Shikoku and Hiroshima, as well as a few to Niigata for, again, snowboarding, and leave the country with savings. Obviously, if you want to spend all of your income every month, you certainly can. Japan has things for you to spend it on, but it's a very serviceable, livable wage for a first job, especially if you're living in like a smaller area. And as for how to get into the JET program, a few things to be clear is you do not need a teaching degree. I did not have one. I did not know anyone that had one. If you do have one, it's a benefit, but it's not required, so don't worry about that. You actually don't need any Japanese ability either. Again, it is an advantage if you have Japanese ability. They will look on that favorably in the interview, but I knew plenty of people who came to Japan on the JET program with absolutely no Japanese whatsoever. So it is possible to get in speaking no Japanese. However, you do have to have a bachelor's degree, but the applications for the JET program usually begin before your bachelor's degree is going to end. So you actually need to apply in advance, and so you'll need, in addition to letters of recommendation, etc., from various teachers, a letter from somebody at your university that can sign and say, based on their current grades and the current units they're in, they will graduate in time to join the JET program. Because you usually apply well ahead of the actual start date of the job, which is usually at the end of summer. Additionally, your letters of recommendation are going to be a key thing, so make sure you have people that can vouch for you. I would say somebody at your university and somebody who knows how well you work are very reliable, and your grades are going to matter too, along with essays, etc., stating why you wish to live and work in Japan. Filling out these applications, which again, start early, they require background checks, etc., doctor's checks, is the first step of the application, and if this goes well, you'll be invited to an interview. The interviews are pretty intense and honestly, pretty weird. I've heard a lot of different stories from a lot of different people, and the vibe can be kind of tense, so take it easy. I think that's kind of the intent. I was 100% sure that I failed my interview because they asked me to explain Easter. I did my best, and one of the people at the table said, if I was an elementary school student, I wouldn't have understood that, which felt bad, and I fumbled out some kind of comment about, yeah, I agree, but I think part of being a teacher is doing the prep, etc., and I would definitely do whatever I need to make sure that I give the appropriate lecture in the real situation. And I guess hopefully that worked because I did end up getting the job. But they will ask you questions about yourself. They'll ask you questions about your Japanese ability. And indeed, if you have really good Japanese ability and you're applying to be an ALT, they might, this happened to me, ask you why you're not applying to be a CIR. So think about that. Why did you apply for the specific position that you asked for? They'll ask you random questions about Japan. You should know some things about Japanese history. You should know who the Japanese prime minister is. There's a lot of trivia, etc., that might come up. If that goes well, then you will get a placement. You can, of course, request specific places to be, but in my experience, they basically look at the 3 places you've listed as places you'd like to go, have a good laugh, chuck it in the bin, and place you wherever they want. I literally only need one hand to count the number of people that I have met who got placed in one of their requested areas. It can happen, but I honestly think that's just by chance. Should you do the JET program then? Well, if you are interested in using Japanese in your future career, life, etc., or if you're interested in maintaining some kind of relationship with Japan in your future life, career, etc., I would say it's a really great job, especially for people right out of uni. Again, you don't have to be that. There are people that I've heard of that just kind of like got tired of their job, decided to do something else, went to Japan in their 30s, and that went great. But broadly speaking, it's a really, really good way to get to Japan, spend time working and living with Japanese people in a real job, and learn from the people that you work with, the people that you live with, etc. If you don't plan on using Japanese in your future, having that kind of connection, that's a bit trickier. So think really carefully about, will the job I want to do in the future be okay with me just completely removing myself from this industry for that amount of time? Can I study on my own while I'm there? Or do I just need a break? Will I, go to grad school and it'll all be fine? I generally would not recommend doing JET for just a year, because usually by the time 1 year is done, you barely kind of figured out how to teach. You barely kind of gotten into a vibe with your school, with the place you're living in. I'd certainly encourage you to block out 2 to 3 to 4 years of your life for the JET program, because that's the way you get the most out of it. I definitely did not feel like I fully understood what I was doing or even what Japan was like after a year. That said though, no matter why you go to Japan, no matter why you do the JET program, a lot of what you get out of it is going to be based on you. They say every situation is different, basically at every single JET lecture, every single orientation, and it's very, very true. Different schools will be different in terms of flexibility. Different schools will have different teachers. Sometimes you might teach at multiple schools, and some of the schools will be a delight. Some of the schools might not. Some of the schools might not be a delight, but they have your favorite teacher. It's very, very diverse. Sometimes you will be used as kind of nothing more than a tape recorder. Other times you will have complete freedom to help out design games and activities that the students enjoy. Other times, you might be sent to an elementary school, like I was here and there, and just given free rein without any real support or background, and you just have to hope what you're doing kind of works. Being adaptable, being flexible, and putting effort in where you can. Because yes, everyone that you'll meet will probably tell you there's a lot of downtime on the JET program sometimes, like times you're just sitting at school kind of twiddling your thumbs. And a little bit of that is great. Like my school was absolutely okay with me using free time when I had literally nothing to do, nothing to prepare, etc., to study Japanese. They considered that a good use of my time. But you do have to ask yourself, is some of the free time you're having actual free time, or could you be preparing your lessons? Could you be looking up ideas for classes? Could you be thinking about what went well in a class and what didn't, etc.? Sometimes you may be treated as a tape recorder because the teacher isn't really innovative in their teaching, and sometimes you may be treated as a tape recorder because you aren't really putting effort to be more than that. And that will depend, again, on the situation, because every situation is different. Also, generally speaking, while you do actually kind of get a pay raise these days as you go through the years, I would say that JET is not a job that has kind of a future to it. It is possible to take your JET position and actually turn it into a contract with the city that you work in, so that you end up doing that the rest of your life. And if that's what you want to do, great. I've met people that are still doing that kind of teaching and they love it. They have a great time. But it is very, very possible to find yourself in a rut where you're just doing JET because you don't know what to do next, or it's kind of scary to go home. And so while I mentioned it's important to think of how long you want to do JET, make sure you don't forget what you also want to do after that, because you might find, that temptation to extend another year, is that the best thing to do? Maybe it is. Maybe you actually do want another year and that will benefit you. But it's important to think clearly about that. And while generally speaking, not only does the JET program pay better than the private companies, etc., it's also more secure. There haven't been scandals like the ones that come up with some of the other companies. And it tends to have better hours because you work, 9 to 5 instead of whatever hours are available. They are very inflexible about location, as I mentioned. You will go where they tell you to go, especially in your first year, and it's very hard to change where you are. I've seen people be able to change houses in a town, but the only time I've seen someone be able to move from one school to another in like an entire different town or prefecture was because their spouse was hired on the JET program as well, and they still had to spend a year apart. And even getting you and your spouse hired by the JET program at the same time is a pretty big accomplishment. So if the possibility of getting put in like a small Japanese town where there's no one who speaks English around you for 1 to 2 hours drive or bike or bus or whatever is something that you just could not deal with, well, it might not be the program for you because that's something that could happen. It's also important to remember that this is a full-time job. This is not messing around in Japan time. This is not a part-time job. This is not a casual thing. These are students at schools, and while you should expect support from your school in learning how to become a teacher, learning how to blend into the community, no one expects you to come as a fully developed, perfect teacher. You should not expect this to be a vacation. You are a full-time employee, you are a participant in Japanese society in a really, really important way, and part of the reason that the interview process is so intense is to ensure that that is an attitude that you have from day one. This is not a vacation, it is a job, even if it is a job that will allow you to go on vacation sometimes. And as a result, the key responsibility of that is kind of that you stick it out for a year, at least. I know a lot of people that have done JET and in some of their spare time on the weekends, etc., gone looking for jobs elsewhere. And I think going to Japan, getting your foot in the door, and then looking for jobs in Japan is great. In my experience, Japanese companies pay a lot more attention to someone that's already in Japan than someone that's not. But that's not appropriate to do, and it's not a good idea to do if you're looking for jobs that start before your contract ends. If you're more interested in just doing a few months of teaching, etc. in Japan to get your foot in the door and then look for work while you're there, that's something you should probably apply for the private companies more because those contracts are shorter, more flexible, etc. All in all though, if your question is just simply, is the JET program a good time? I would have to say I have met people that had a bad time. It does happen. But that's not because of the JET program, it's not because of Japan. That's just because sometimes people have a bad time at a job. I had an amazing experience on the JET program. I am incredibly thankful for the patience that all the teachers who work with me had. I look back on my first year with a lot of cringe, but I tried at least. I did work at it. And into my second and third year, I really did see myself kind of being part of a community and fitting a stride and felt like I was contributing to my school, kind of making an impact. Most of the people I know also had a really, really great time overall. And I personally credit the JET program with helping me kind of realize, this is going to sound overblown, but I'm serious about this, what kind of adult, what kind of person I wanted to be. The teachers I worked with, the town I lived in. I'm not saying I left it a fully formed human being or whatever, but it really did help me kind of get my stuff together, trying to keep this PG-13. And yes, you will find the Japanese education system frustrating in some ways, but it's also important to keep an open mind. You are not going there as an expert, and some things you find frustrating or find not done in the best way do have a reason behind them, or actually are more effective than you think. And you really won't survive without that mindset. You're not going to have to accept everything. When I left, I still thought the textbooks being used in middle schools were kind of poor. I do not see any value in the write English words on a page and then the teacher just circles it practice method that was quite common. But if you're able to show an openness to just seeing why things work the way they do, from learning from people that will have a lot more experience than you do as a teacher, and from working together to find solutions to various ideas, it is an experience that can not only be a fun way to spend time in Japan and get to better at Japanese, get to know Japanese culture, but also a really great way to grow as a person and do a job that has a high amount of satisfaction because you will be giving back to your school, you'll be giving back to your community, and people will learn who you are and appreciate you for that. And those kinds of connections that you build there are ones that you will not forget. So all in all, if you're interested in the JET program, I highly recommend you go for it. And I wish you best of luck because the process is quite intense and can be a little hard. But do remember that it is a job, a fun one, and a pretty unique one in some ways, but still a job. And absolutely make sure that you can connect it to your future, as in what you want to do. You can always go to Japan on vacation, spend months there, do everything you want, but the JET program ultimately is a work experience, so make sure that you want to work in Japan, you want to work in Japan in schools, and that this process has a direct link to whatever you're hoping to do after that. But if that is the case for you, I wish you the best of luck. I hope you have a great time. And who knows, maybe it can open all kinds of wonderful pathways in your future, such as being a ginger professor who makes videos about random thoughts he has under the grand delusion that anyone cares what he has to say.